I smoothed my apron and took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation I knew was coming. George's heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, and I braced myself against the kitchen counter. "Tara, honey?" His voice was tentative, almost sheepish. "We need to talk." I turned, forcing a smile. "What is it, George?" He stepped into the kitchen, a familiar figure hovering behind him. My stomach dropped as I recognized Adrian, George's brother, the last person I wanted to see darkening our doorstep. "Look who showed up." George's grin was strained. "Adrian's in town and needs a place to stay for a while. I told him he could crash here." Adrian sauntered in, all easy smiles and charm. "Hey, sis! Long time no see." I gripped the edge of the counter, willing my voice to remain steady. "Adrian, what a surprise." George's eyes darted between us, clearly sensing the tension. "It'll just be for a few days, right, Adrian?" "Oh, absolutely," Adrian drawled, already making himself at home by opening our fridge. "Just until I get back on my feet." I'd heard that line before. The last time Adrian had stayed with us, those few days had stretched into months of chaos and drained bank accounts. "George, can I speak to you privately for a moment?" I managed through gritted teeth. We stepped into the hallway and I hissed, "What were you thinking?" "You know how I feel about Adrian staying here." George ran a hand through his thinning hair. I know, but he's family, Tara. We can't just turn him away." "Can't we?" I crossed my arms. "After everything that happened last time?" Before George could respond, a small voice piped up from the stairs. "Dad, who's that man in the kitchen?" We both turned to see our son, Ethan, peering down at us with wide eyes. George's face softened. "That's your Uncle Adrian, buddy. He's going to be staying with us for a little while." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Is that why you and Mom are fighting?" "We're not fighting, sweetie," I said quickly, shooting George a pointed look. "We're just discussing things. Why don't you go say hello to your uncle?" As Ethan padded into the kitchen, I turned back to George. "This isn't over. We need to set some ground rules." George nodded, looking relieved to postpone the argument. We rejoined the others in the kitchen, where Adrian was regaling Ethan with some far-fetched tale. "And that's how I wrestled an alligator in Florida," Adrian finished with a flourish. Ethan's eyes were as big as saucers. "Wow, Uncle Adrian, you're so cool." I felt a pang of worry. Adrian had always been able to charm Ethan, and I feared the influence he might have on our impressionable son. "All right, Ethan," I said, perhaps a bit too sharply. "Time to get ready for bed. Say goodnight to everyone." As Ethan trudged upstairs, Adrian turned to us with that infuriating grin. "So, where am I bunking?" George glanced at me nervously. We thought the guest room would be." "Actually," I interrupted, an idea forming, "the guest room is being repainted. You'll have to take the pull-out couch in the basement." Adrian's smile faltered for just a moment. "Oh, well, that's fine. I'm not picky." As George showed Adrian downstairs, I allowed myself a small, vindictive smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Later that night, as George and I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. "George," I whispered, "promise me this won't be like last time." He rolled over, wrapping an arm around me. "I promise, Tara. It'll be different this time." But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder if I was naive to believe him. Little did I know, Adrian's arrival was just the beginning of a storm that would threaten to tear our family apart. A week into Adrian's stay, and our once peaceful home had become a minefield of tension. I stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing dishes with more force than necessary, when George stumbled in, bleary-eyed and reeking of cigarette smoke. "Morning, honey," he mumbled, reaching for the coffee pot. I bit back a sharp retort. "It's 2 p.m, George. Where have you been?" He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "Just catching up with Adrian. Lost track of time." "Lost track of time?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my voice. "You missed Ethan's soccer game. He was crushed when you didn't show up." George's face fell. "Oh, God, I completely forgot. Is he?" "He's in his room. I cut him off. Probably still crying." Guilt flashed across George's face, but before he could respond, Adrian sauntered into the kitchen, looking far too chipper for someone who'd been out all night. "Hey, family," he announced, clapping George on the back. "Who's up for a barbecue? My treat." I slammed a plate down, making both men jump. "A barbecue? Are you kidding me? You two have been out God knows where all night, and now you want to play happy families?" Adrian held up his hands. that infuriating smirk still on his face. "Whoa, sis. Calm down. We were just having a little fun." "Don't call me sis," I snapped. "And don't tell me to calm down. This isn't a frat house, Adrian. We have responsibilities here." George stepped between us, ever the peacemaker. "Tara, honey, let's not fight. I'll go talk to Ethan, okay?" As George headed upstairs, Adrian leaned against the counter, eyeing me. "You know, Tara, you really need to loosen up. All this stress can't be good for you." I whirled on him, dish towel clenched in my fist. "What I need is for you to stop disrupting our lives. When are you planning on leaving exactly?" Adrian's smile faltered for a moment. "Soon. Soon. Just need to get a few things sorted out first." "What things?" I pressed, suspicion gnawing at me. "What are you really doing here, Adrian?" Before he could answer, a crash from upstairs made us both jump. I raced up the stairs, Adrian close behind, to find George standing in Ethan's doorway looking shell-shocked. Ethan's room was a disaster. Books and toys were strewn everywhere, and in the center of it all stood our son, red-faced and trembling with anger. "I hate you," Ethan screamed at George. "You're never here anymore. You're always with him." He pointed accusingly at Adrian. I pushed past George, kneeling in front of Ethan. "Sweetie, calm down. Let's talk about this." But Ethan was inconsolable. "No! I want Dad to go away. I want Uncle Adrian to go away. I hate them both." George looked stricken. "Son, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." "Get out," Ethan yelled, hurling a toy car that narrowly missed George's head. I turned to George and Adrian, my voice low and dangerous. "View downstairs, now." In the living room, I faced the two men, fury simmering just beneath the surface. "This ends now. I want answers. What's really going on here?" George and Adrian exchanged a look that sent chills down my spine. "Tara," George began, his voice trembling, "there's something we need to tell you." Adrian cut in, his usual bravado gone. "It's not as bad as it seems, I swear. We just got into a bit of trouble, that's all." "What kind of trouble?" I demanded, dread pooling in my stomach. George took a deep breath. We owe some people money. A lot of money." The room seemed to spin around me. "How much?" The number George whispered made my knees weak. I sank onto the couch, my mind reeling. "How?" I managed to choke out. "How did this happen?" As Adrian launched into an explanation about bad investments and unlucky bets, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. Peeking out of Adrian's jacket pocket was a pawn shop receipt. In that moment, I knew. This was just the tip of the iceberg, and our family was headed for a storm that threatened to tear us apart. The pawn shop receipt burned a hole in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that George and Adrian were hiding something far worse than they'd admitted. Over the next few days, I kept my eyes and ears open, determined to uncover the truth. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I first noticed the hushed phone calls. George's voice drifted from his study, tense and urgent. "We need more time," he hissed. "Just a few more days. I swear we'll have it." I crept closer to the door, straining to hear. "No, don't do that," George pleaded. "We'll figure something out. Adrian's working on it." My heart raced. Who was he talking to? What did Adrian have to do with it? The conversation ended abruptly, and I barely had time to retreat before George emerged, looking haggard and pale. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He jumped, startled. "Oh, Tara. Yeah, just work stuff. Nothing to worry about." But the tremor in his hands told a different story. That night, I lay awake, listening to George toss and turn beside me. Around midnight, his phone buzzed. He slipped out of bed thinking I was asleep and crept downstairs. I followed, silent as a shadow, and watched from the top of the stairs as he met Adrian in the kitchen. "We're running out of time," George whispered urgently. "They're getting impatient." Adrian ran a hand through his hair. I know, but I've got a plan. There's this guy I know. He can get us the money, but what?" George pressed. Adrian hesitated. "It's not exactly legal, George. We'd be taking a big risk." My blood ran cold. What had they gotten themselves into? George paced the kitchen. "I don't know, Adrian. If we get caught—" "We won't," Adrian assured him. "Trust me, brother, it's our only way out of this mess." I'd heard enough. I stepped into the kitchen, making both men jump. "What mess?" I demanded, "and don't you dare lie to me again." George's face crumpled. "Tara, we—" But Adrian cut him off. "It's nothing for you to worry about, sis. Just a little financial hiccup. We've got it under control." I rounded on him, fury rising. Don't patronize me, Adrian. I heard enough to know you're in serious trouble. What have you done? The brothers exchanged a look of panic. Tara, please, George begged. We can't talk about this now. It's complicated. Complicated? I laughed bitterly. You're discussing illegal activities in our kitchen at midnight. I think I deserve some answers. Adrian stepped forward, his charm cranked up to maximum. Look, Tara, I know this seems bad, but I promise you, we're handling it. Just give us a little more time. I shook my head, disgusted. Time for what? To drag George deeper into whatever hole you've dug? To risk our family's future on one of your schemes? George reached for me, but I pulled away. Don't touch me. I want the truth now. All of it. The silence stretched between us, thick with tension. Finally, George spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We owe money to some dangerous people, Tara. A lot of money, and if we don't pay soon... He trailed off, but the implication was clear. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. How much? When George named the figure, I thought I might faint. How? I gasped. How is that even possible? Adrian stepped in. It started small, just a few bets here and there, but then we tried to win it back, and things escalated. I turned to George, tears stinging my eyes. You promised me you'd stopped gambling. You swore to me, George. He couldn't meet my gaze. I'm sorry, Tara. I never meant for it to go this far. As the full weight of their deception crashed over me, a horrible thought occurred to me. The pawn shop receipt, I said slowly. What did you sell? The guilty look that passed between them confirmed my worst fears. What did you sell? I repeated, my voice rising. George's answer shattered what was left of my world. Your grandmother's jewelry collection. In that moment, I knew our family would never be the same again. The revelation about my grandmother's jewelry was the final straw. The next morning, I confronted George in the kitchen, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. I want Adrian out of this house. Today. George's eyes widened. Tara, please. We can't just throw him out. He's family. Family? I spat. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie and gamble away our future. Adrian chose that moment to saunter in, oblivious to the tension. Morning, folks. What's for breakfast? I whirled on him. Nothing. Pack your bags. You're leaving. Adrian's smirk faltered. Come on, sis. Don't be like that. Don't call me sis, I shouted, my control finally snapping. You've worn out your welcome. Get out. George stepped between us. Tara, calm down. We can work this out. Work what out? Ethan's small voice came from the doorway. We all froze, realizing he'd heard everything. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Ethan, honey, go back to your room. Mom and Dad need to talk. But Ethan stood his ground, his eyes darting between us. Are you fighting because of Uncle Adrian? The silence that followed was deafening. George knelt down, reaching for Ethan. Son, it's complicated, grown-up stuff. Ethan jerked away. Stop treating me like a baby. I know something's wrong. You're always arguing, and Dad's never home anymore. My heart broke seeing the pain in my son's eyes. I shot a venomous glare at George and Adrian. See what you've done? Your selfish actions are tearing this family apart. George looked stricken. Ethan, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Adrian, for once, seemed at a loss for words. I made a decision then and there. Ethan, go pack a bag. We're going to stay with Grandma for a while. What? George exclaimed. Tara, you can't just leave. I stood my ground. Watch me. I won't let you two drag us down with you. Ethan and I are leaving until you sort out this mess. As Ethan ran upstairs, George grabbed my arm. Please, don't do this. We can fix this together. I yanked my arm away. Fix it? How, George? By selling more of our belongings? By getting involved in something illegal? Adrian stepped forward. Tara, listen. I have a plan that could solve everything. No, I cut him off. I don't want to hear any more of your plans. They're what got us into this mess in the first place. George's face crumpled. What about our marriage, our family? I felt a twinge of guilt, but steeled myself. You should have thought about that before you lied to me, before you gambled away our savings and pawned my grandmother's jewelry. Ethan came back downstairs, dragging his backpack. His eyes were red-rimmed, but he looked determined. I took his hand. Come on, sweetie, let's go. As we headed for the door, George made one last plea. Tara, please, don't leave. I love you. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Without turning around, I said, if you love us, you'll fix this. And when you do, maybe we can talk about coming home. With that, I walked out, Ethan's small hand in mine. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of George and Adrian in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway looking lost. My heart ached, but I knew I was doing the right thing. This separation might be the wake-up call George needed to break free from Adrian's influence and make things right. As we pulled up to my mother's house, Ethan looked up at me. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" I squeezed his hand, forcing a smile. "We will be, sweetie. We will be." But as I knocked on my mother's door, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. Whatever came next, I knew our family would never be the same again. 2 weeks at my mother's house had done little to soothe the ache in my heart. Ethan was withdrawn, spending most of his time glued to his video games. I'd barely spoken to George, aside from terse text messages about bills and Ethan's school schedule. It was a crisp autumn evening when I decided to swing by our house to pick up some more clothes for Ethan. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something odd. My car was missing. Heart racing, I fumbled for my keys and burst through the front door. "George?" I called out. No answer. The house was eerily quiet. I climbed the stairs, a sense of dread growing with each step. In our bedroom, dresser drawers hung open, clothes strewn about. George's closet was half empty. My hands shaking, I dialed George's number. Straight to voicemail. "Where the hell are you?" I hissed into the phone. "Call me back. Now." As I paced the room, my eye caught on something poking out from under the bed. I knelt down and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a receipt from a pawn shop, dated just 2 days ago. The item description made my blood run cold. Antique silver tea set. My grandmother's tea set. The one she'd left me in her will. The one I'd been saving for Ethan's wedding day. Fury and panic warred inside me. I stormed down to the basement, praying I was wrong. But when I threw open the storage closet, my worst fears were confirmed. The carefully packed box containing my most precious family heirlooms was gone. I sank to the floor, my mind reeling. How could George do this? How far had he fallen? My phone buzzed, startling me. A text from an unknown number. "Meet us at Riverside Park, 1 hour. Come alone or deal's off." My heart pounded. What deal? What had George and Adrian gotten themselves into? I knew I should call the police, but fear for George's safety held me back. Whatever trouble he was in, I couldn't bear the thought of him getting hurt, or worse. With trembling hands, I texted my mother, asking her to keep Ethan overnight. Then I got in my mother's borrowed car and drove to the park, my mind racing with possibilities, each worse than the last. The park was deserted when I arrived, shadows lengthening in the fading light. I clutched my phone, ready to dial 911 at a moment's notice. A figure emerged from behind a tree. George. He looked haggard, his eyes darting nervously. "Tara," he breathed. "You came." "Where's my car, George? And my grandmother's tea set?" I demanded. He flinched. "I'm so sorry, we needed the money, but it's going to be okay now. Adrian's got a plan." "A plan?" I cut him off. "Like all his other brilliant plans that got us into this mess?" George grabbed my arms, his eyes pleading. "You don't understand. These people, they're dangerous, if we don't pay them back." A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around to see Adrian approaching, flanked by 2 burly men I didn't recognize. "Well, well," Adrian drawled. "The gang's all here." One of the men stepped forward, his hand ominously inside his jacket. "You got our money?" George paled. We're working on it. Just a little more time." The man's face hardened. "Time's up. You know the consequences." In that moment, everything became crystal clear. This wasn't just about gambling debts or pawned heirlooms. My family was in real danger. I stepped between George and the men, my voice steadier than I felt. "How much?" The man named a figure that made my stomach lurch. I took a deep breath, weighing our options. We could run, but for how long? We could go to the police, but would that put us in even more danger? Or I could make one last desperate move to save my family. "I have a proposition for you," I said, meeting the man's cold gaze. "One that will get you your money and keep my family safe." As all eyes turned to me, I silently prayed I wasn't making the biggest mistake of my life. My heart pounded as I crept up the attic stairs, following the muffled voices that had woken me in the dead of night. I'd returned home yesterday against my better judgment, after George had tearfully promised things would change. Now, as I reached the top of the stairs, I realized how foolish I'd been to believe him. The attic door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. I peered through the crack, my blood turning to ice at the sight before me. George and Adrian were hunched over a large box, my grandmother's antique collection spread out around them. They spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "This should cover at least half," Adrian muttered, holding up a delicate porcelain figurine. George nodded, his face a mask of guilt and desperation. "What about the rest? They won't wait much longer, Adrian." "We'll figure it out," Adrian assured him. "We always do." I couldn't contain myself any longer. I burst through the door, startling them both. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" They jumped apart, guilt written all over their faces. George looked like he might be sick. "Tara, I can explain." "Explain what?" I snarled, snatching the figurine from Adrian's hand. "How you're stealing my family heirlooms to pay off your gambling debts." Adrian stepped forward, hands raised placatingly. "Now, Tara, let's not overreact. We're just borrowing them for a bit. Once we get back on our feet." "Shut up," I shouted, rounding on him. "This is all your fault. You show up here, drag George back into your schemes, and now you're robbing me blind." George reached for me, his eyes pleading. "Honey, please, we didn't have a choice. These people, they're dangerous if we don't pay them." "So this is your solution?" I gestured wildly at the scattered antiques. "Stealing from your own family?" A small voice from behind me made us all freeze. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" Ethan stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. The sight of him, so small and vulnerable, broke something inside me. I turned back to George and Adrian, my voice low and dangerous. "You have until morning to get these things back where they belong, and then you're both leaving, for good." George blanched. "Tara, please, where will we go?" "That's not my problem anymore," I said coldly. "You made your choice." As I ushered Ethan back to his room, trying to soothe his questions and fears, I heard frantic whispers from the attic. I knew in my gut that this wasn't over. The next morning, I woke early, determined to see George and Adrian out. But as I descended the stairs, an eerie silence greeted me. The house felt empty. With growing dread, I checked the attic. The box of antiques was gone. So were George and Adrian. I raced to our bedroom, yanking open drawers and closets. George's things were missing. On the bed lay a hastily scrawled note. "Tara, I'm so sorry. We had no choice. They threatened Eden. We'll make this right, I swear. Please forgive me. Love, George." My knees gave out and I sank to the floor, the note crumpling in my fist. How had it come to this? My husband, a thief in the night, running from dangerous men with my family's treasures. As the reality of our situation crashed over me, I heard Ethan stirring in his room. I had to be strong for him. I had to fix this mess George and Adrian had created. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. It was time to make a call I'd been dreading, to my old friend on the police force. As I dialed, I steeled myself for what was to come. Our family was in danger, and I was the only one left to save it. My hands shook as I ended the call with Detective Martinez. He'd promised to put out an APB on George and Adrian, but his words rang in my ears. "Tara, you need to prepare yourself. This could get ugly." I sank onto the couch, my mind racing. How had our life come to this? My husband and his brother, fugitives with a box of stolen antiques, running from God knows who. A small hand touched my arm. Ethan stood there, his eyes wide with worry. "Mom, where's Dad?" I pulled him close, fighting back tears. "He had to go away for a little while, sweetie, but we're going to be okay." As if the universe was mocking me, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. With trembling fingers, I answered. "Mrs. Thompson?" A gruff voice sent chills down my spine. "We have your husband and his brother. If you want to see them alive again, bring $100,000 to the old warehouse on Pier 7. You have 3 hours." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in horror, my mind reeling. Where on earth was I supposed to get that kind of money? I called Detective Martinez back, relaying the message. He urged me not to go, to let the police handle it. But I knew in my gut that if I didn't show up, George and Adrian might not make it out alive. "Ethan, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to go to Grandma's for a little while." After dropping Ethan off with my confused and worried mother, I drove to the bank. With a mixture of shame and desperation, I emptied our savings account and took out a second mortgage on the house. It still wasn't enough. With time ticking away, I made a decision that tore at my heart. I drove to the local pawn shop, the same one where George had sold my grandmother's tea set. Tears in my eyes, I handed over my wedding ring and the few remaining pieces of jewelry I had. The dealer's eyes widened as he counted out the cash. "Lady, whatever trouble you're in, I hope it's worth all this." I wasn't sure it was. With barely minutes to spare, I pulled up to the dilapidated warehouse. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pier. My heart pounded as I clutched the duffel bag full of cash. "George?" I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Adrian?" A scuffling sound came from the back, and then they appeared. George and Adrian, bruised and disheveled, flanked by two menacing figures. "Tara!" George's voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." Adrian, for once, was silent, his usual bravado gone. One of the men stepped forward, his hand resting ominously on his hip. "You got our money?" I held up the bag. "It's all here. Now let them go." He smirked. "Slide it over. Nice and easy." I did as he said, my eyes never leaving George. As soon as the man had the bag, he nodded to his partner. They shoved George and Adrian towards me. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mrs. Thompson," the man sneered. "Let's hope your husband learns to pay his debts on time from now on." As they retreated into the shadows, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. George stumbled towards me, reaching out. "Tara, I stepped back, my voice ice cold. Don't you dare touch me." Adrian piped up. "Sis, we can explain." "Shut up," I exploded, years of frustration and anger pouring out. "You've ruined everything. Our savings, our home, our family. All for what? Your pathetic gambling addiction?" George fell to his knees, sobbing. "Please, Tara, I'll do anything. Just don't leave me." I looked at him, this broken shell of the man I'd married, and felt nothing but a cold, hard resolve. "It's too late, George," I said quietly. "You've made your choice. Now I'm making mine." As I turned to walk away, leaving them both on that dark, lonely pier, I realized that this was just the beginning. The real fight to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my family's future was only just beginning. The morning after the warehouse confrontation, I sat at our kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee in front of me. George slept fitfully on the couch, having begged to come home. Adrian was gone, disappeared into the night like the coward he was. When George finally stirred, I was ready. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady and cold. He nodded, eyes bloodshot and full of shame. "Tara, I held up a hand, silencing him. "No, you listen. If you ever want to be part of this family again, this is how it's going to be." I laid out my terms. Adrian was never to set foot in our house again. George would attend Gamblers Anonymous and therapy. Every penny of our savings and my heirlooms would be accounted for and replaced. "And if you ever lie to me again," I finished, my voice breaking slightly, "we're done. No second chances." George nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'll do anything, Tara. I swear." Just then, Ethan padded into the kitchen, his eyes widening at the sight of his father. "Dad? You're back?" The look on George's face, a mixture of love, shame, and fear, nearly broke my resolve. But I had to stay strong, for all of us. "Ethan, honey," I said gently, "Dad and I need to talk to you about some changes that are going to happen." Over the next few weeks, our lives shifted dramatically. George moved into the spare room, attending meetings every night. I took control of our finances, working extra hours to rebuild our savings. Ethan, my brave, perceptive boy, seemed to understand more than we gave him credit for. One night, as I tucked him in, he asked, "Mom, is Dad going to be okay?" I smoothed his hair, choosing my words carefully. "I hope so, sweetie. He's trying very hard to make things right." Ethan nodded solemnly. "I'm glad you made him stop hanging out with Uncle Adrian. He wasn't very nice." My heart swelled with pride and sadness. "You're right, honey. Sometimes we have to make tough choices to protect our family." As the months passed, I watched George struggle and grow. He threw himself into his recovery, taking on extra work to repay our debts. Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild trust. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching Ethan play in the yard, George turned to me, his eyes clear and earnest. "Tara," he said softly, "I know I can never undo the hurt I've caused, but I want you to know how grateful I am for this second chance. You and Ethan, you're my whole world." I felt a flicker of the old warmth in my chest. "I know, George. We're getting there, one day at a time." As the sun set, casting a golden glow over our little family, I realized something profound. The crisis that had nearly torn us apart had also given me strength I never knew I possessed. I had stood my ground, protected my son, and fought for our future. Ethan's laughter rang out as George chased him around the yard, their bond slowly mending. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. Our family wasn't perfect. We had a long road ahead, full of challenges and hard work, but we were together, stronger for having weathered the storm. As I watched my two boys, I made a silent vow. No matter what life threw at us next, I would face it head on. I had found my voice, my strength, and I would never let anyone, not Adrian, not George, not anyone, threaten our happiness again. The old Tara, the one who had let others make decisions for her, was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who would fight tooth and nail for her family's well-being. And as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I felt a surge of hope for our future. We had been tested, nearly broken, but we had survived. Whatever came next, we would face it together, one day at a time. Matt, are you really going to miss the birth of your child just to close a deal? Deal's worth more than you're ever going to be, Stacy, Matt replied, his voice cold and detached, as he fixed his tie. I stared at him, a lump forming in my throat. How did we get to this point? At 36 weeks pregnant and on maternity leave, I had slowly become accustomed to Matt's increasing absence. His real estate career consumed him, leaving little room for our marriage. Before my pregnancy, I was a dedicated marketing executive. Now, my days were filled with preparing for our baby boy, while Matt's days were filled with contracts and property viewings. Angie, my best friend since college, had been an incredible support. Stacy, you need to stop worrying about Matt and focus on yourself and the baby, she often said, her voice firm but kind. Easy for you to say, I replied once, tears pooling in my eyes. You're not married to a ghost. Angie squeezed my hand. You deserve better. Remember that. My parents, Lydia and Fred, lived nearby and were another source of steadiness in this storm. Dad helped set up the nursery, while Mom fussed over me, making sure I ate well and rested. Stacy, darling, you need to take it easy, Mom reminded me as she set a plate of food in front of me. Stress isn't good for the baby. Thanks, Mom. I forced a smile, eyes darting to my phone, hoping irrationally for a message from Matt. But there was nothing. Days turned into nights, and Matt's empty promises became a grim routine. He'd drag himself home late, reeking of deals and desperation. Busy night? I asked one evening when he finally stumbled in. Don't start, Stacy. I closed a huge deal today, he snapped, barely glancing at me. The tension grew, but I clung to hope that the birth of our child would bring him back to us. One late afternoon, while resting on the couch, the door clicked open. Hey, Matt, I began, only for my words to trail off as Angie walked in. Matt's not here? I shook my head. Out with clients again. She sighed deeply. Come on, let's get you out for a walk. Clear your head. We strolled slowly down our tree-lined street, Angie chatting about her latest project at work. The normalcy of it was a balm, if only temporary. Back home, I shuffled through the nursery, adjusting tiny socks and folding baby clothes. The car arrived, signaling Matt's return. Matt, can we talk? I began quietly. Not now, Stacy, he murmured, eyes glued to his phone. I bit my lip, fighting the urge to scream. How long could this continue? I placed a hand on my belly, feeling a tiny kick. Soon, I reminded myself. As the days passed, one question haunted me. Could Matt be the father our son needed? Mom, what am I going to do? I found myself asking during another quiet dinner. One step at a time, Stacy, she replied gently. We'll be here for you, no matter what. Matt's phone buzzed with another urgent message, and he picked up without hesitation. I glanced at him, heart heavy. The baby kicked again, a fierce reminder of the life about to change. Matt, I tried again, voice trembling, please be here when I need you, when our son needs you. He looked up briefly, a flicker of something in his eyes before it vanished. I'll do my best, Stacy. But his best, I feared, wouldn't be enough. The pain hit suddenly, sharp and twisting. I doubled over, gripping the kitchen counter. Mom, I cried out, struggling to catch my breath. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts from Matt. Without even looking, I knew he wasn't coming. Stacy, what's wrong? Mom rushed in, panic in her eyes. I think it's time, I panted. Mom grabbed the hospital bag, guiding me to the car as Dad fired up the engine. Hang in there, sweetie. We're almost there, Dad reassured me. We made it to the hospital, nurses swiftly taking charge. I clutched Mom's hand as we moved down the brightly lit corridors. "Call Matt," I gasped between contractions. "I've called him 5 times, Mom said, worry etched on her face. "He's not answering." Hours felt like days as the contractions grew stronger. The hospital room blurred, white walls closing in. "You're doing great, Stacy," Mom cooed, wiping my forehead. With every push, all I could think about was Matt not being here, about him treating our child as less important than his precious deals. I ground my teeth, focusing on the baby's need to come out healthy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a wail filled the room. My son, my beautiful Nathan. "He's perfect, Stacy," Mom said, tears streaming down her face as she handed him to me. I gazed at Nathan, emotions flooding me. The joy of holding him battled with the heartbreak of Matt's absence. As Nathan nestled in my arms, I forced myself to focus on his tiny face, his small breath against my skin. "Meeting ran late. I'll come by later." Matt's text felt like a slap. I stared at his words, a cold anger growing inside me. Meeting ran late. Nothing about the birth of his son, just empty words delaying his inevitable absence. "Mom, he'll never change, will he?" I whispered, more to myself than to her. "One step at a time, honey," Mom replied, her voice breaking. Hours drifted by and Nathan fell asleep. Exhaustion took over and I dozed off with a tight grip on his little hand. I awoke to the shuffle of footsteps and the faint beep of machines, but no sign of Matt. Angie appeared, relief on her face. "How are you holding up, new mama? Look at him, Angie." I said, my voice fragile. "He's so beautiful." Angie leaned in to see Nathan, her expression softening. "He's perfect, Stacy. I'm sorry Matt's not here. You deserved better." Angie's words mirrored my own thoughts. Could I keep on hoping when it was clear Matt was never going to come through for us? Evening came, still no Matt. Nurses looked at me with kind pity, as did other new mothers with their partners by their sides. "Stacy, it's been a long day," Mom said gently. "Rest up. We'll take care of things." Nodding, I lay back, Nathan sleeping in his crib beside me. As fatigue pulled me under, one thing was painfully clear. Matt might never prioritize us. But as I glanced at Nathan, I knew I had to find a way forward. For him. For both of us. The hospital room door creaked open, and there stood Matt, looking at his phone instead of us. I glanced up from Nathan, my heart heavy with disappointment. "Finally decided to show up?" I said, unable to mask the bitterness in my voice. "Yeah, got here as soon as I could," he murmured, eyes still glued to his screen. "You missed our son's birth, Matt," I said softly, anger simmering just beneath the surface. He looked up briefly, barely glancing at Nathan before his gaze shifted back to his phone. "I had important clients, Stacy. It's not like you were alone. Your parents were here." I shook my head, disbelief all over my face. "He's your son. Doesn't that matter to you?" Matt sighed, slipping his phone into his pocket and finally stepping closer. He peered at Nathan, then back at me. "I'm here now, aren't I?" I didn't have the energy to argue. "Just hold him," I said, handing Nathan over. Matt held Nathan awkwardly, like he was a foreign object. His disconnect was palpable. "We need to talk, Matt," I began, watching him closely. "About us. About what's been happening." "Now? In the hospital?" He scoffed, eyebrow raised. "Yes, now. This can't wait," I insisted. "Our family can't wait." He handed Nathan back, turning towards the window. "What do you want me to say, Stacy? I'm trying to provide for us, to give us a good life." "A good life?" I echoed, incredulous. "A good life where you're never home? Where you miss the birth of your own child because of a meeting?" "You knew what you were marrying into," he snapped, finally locking eyes with me. "I told you my career was demanding." "But I didn't sign up for this neglect," I countered, keeping my voice steady. "You were different before. Where did that man go? People change, Stacy. This is who I am now. Deal with it." Tears burned at the edges of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "What about Nathan? What kind of father will you be to him?" "I'll provide for him. Isn't that what matters?" he said coldly. Mom re-entered the room, sensing the tension. "Everything okay here?" "Fine, Mom," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just talking." Matt pulled out his phone again, an unmistakable signal that the conversation was over for him. "I have to head back to the office. I'll check in later." And just like that, he was gone. A few days later, I was discharged. As we arrived home, Matt was nowhere to be found. Instead, my parents were there, ready to help with Nathan's adjustment. "Welcome home," they exclaimed, bringing a small moment of joy. They helped me inside, talking about the future, but my mind kept drifting back to Matt's coldness. Flashbacks of our happy days taunted me. Shared breakfasts, silly arguments over movies, and plans for a future that now seemed impossible. As I settled Nathan into his crib, I whispered, "We'll be okay, little one. I promise." Then, in a burst of determination, I pulled out my laptop and started searching. For answers, for help, for a way forward. Matt's neglect and ambition had pushed me to the edge, but for Nathan's sake, I would fight. He deserved better than this. We both did. Dad offered a comforting hug. "We're here for you, Stacy, whatever you need." I nodded, with tears finally spilling over. "Thank you, Dad. I'm going to need all the help I can get." I settled Nathan into his crib and stepped into the living room, where Matt sat with his laptop, typing away. The tension was thick as I took a deep breath. "Matt, we need to talk about our finances," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced up briefly, a hint of annoyance on his face. "What about them?" "How much have you spent on the condo?" I asked, my palms sweaty. "It's an investment, Stacy," he replied dismissively, eyes drifting back to his screen. "It'll pay off." "An investment with our savings?" I pressed, voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. "And loans?" He looked up again, irritation clear. "You don't understand how business works." "I understand that you're risking our future for it," I stated, struggling to keep my composure. Matt finally closed his laptop, glaring at me. "This is about providing for our family and making sure we have the best. Or is it about impressing your father?" I shot back, the words out before I could stop them. His eyes narrowed dangerously. "Don't bring my father into this. He's already in it. Matt, you're trying to impress him at our expense," I accused, the pieces falling into place. Just then, the front door opened and Greg walked in. He raised an eyebrow at the tension. "Am I interrupting something?" "No, Greg, just catching up on business," Matt said, his demeanor suddenly cooler. Greg smirked, nodding toward me. "Stacy, you good?" I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, I'm fine." After an awkward pause, Greg turned to Matt. "Did you tell her about the plan with the inheritance?" I froze, eyes wide. "What plan?" Matt's face turned beet red. "Greg, that's none of her concern." Greg shrugged. "She's your wife, she should know." "What plan, Matt?" I demanded, stepping closer. Matt's jaw tightened. "It's nothing, just a way to secure our family's future." "He's using Nathan to gain favor with Daddy," Greg interjected, ignoring Matt's glare. "Hoping a grandkid in his corner seals the deal." "Is that true, Matt?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. Matt remained silent, his expression a cold mask. That silence said more than words ever could. I turned to Greg. "Do you know how much debt Matt's gotten us into?" Greg frowned. I didn't know the extent, but I figured it was bad. "It's worse than you think," I murmured, feeling the weight of our situation. "Good to know where your priorities are, Matt," Greg said disdainfully. "I always knew you were a piece of work, but this? Using your kid?" Matt snapped. "Mind your own business, Greg." Greg shrugged, just looking out for Stacy and Nathan here. Unlike some people. Exhausted and overwhelmed, I turned to Matt. "We're done, Matt. I can't do this anymore." "Stacy, don't be dramatic," he scoffed. "We're just going through a rough patch." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "This isn't a rough patch. It's our life, and you've ruined it." With that, I walked past Matt, past Greg, and into the room where Nathan slept peacefully, unaware of the storm outside. I knew one thing for certain. I had to protect him from this mess, from Matt's reckless ambition. The fight was just beginning, and I had to be ready. Greg's parting words echoed in my mind. "If you need help, Stacy, you know where to find me." The door slammed behind me as I carried Nathan to the car, my heart racing. "We're staying with my parents for a while," I said through gritted teeth, not even looking back at Matt. "Stacy, don't do this. You're overreacting." Matt called after me. Ignoring him, I strapped Nathan into his car seat and started the engine. I drove in silence, anger and sorrow fighting for control. Upon reaching my parents' house, Mom and Dad were waiting on the porch, concern etched in their faces. "What's happening?" Dad asked as he took Nathan from my arms. "Matt, he's ruining our lives with his schemes," I said, barely holding back tears. Inside, Mom offered me a hot tea while Dad rocked Nathan gently. "Tell us everything," Mom urged. Between sips of tea, I recounted the details, the debt, the condo, Matt's twisted plan. Their expressions darkened with every word. "He has the nerve to use Nathan as a pawn," Dad growled, his protective instincts kicking in. "We'll sort this out." Later that evening, while Nathan napped, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Matt. "We need to talk. Come home." I shook my head, knowing a meeting would only end in more frustration. Instead, I opened my laptop and began searching for legal advice. A fighting spirit gripped me. I couldn't let Matt ruin our lives. Days turned into a week. My parents helped with Nathan, providing a stable environment I sorely needed. Meanwhile, I met with several lawyers, finally retaining a fierce one who assured me I'd have a fighting chance. A knock on my parents' door startled me one evening. I opened it to find Matt standing there, an unfamiliar coldness in his eyes. "Stacy, enough of this game. Come home," he demanded. "This isn't a game, Matt. You've jeopardized our future," I replied, standing firm. "You're making a big mistake," he sneered. "Make this easy and come back." I crossed my arms, blocking the door. "I won't let you drag Nathan and me down with you." "Fine," he spat, tossing an envelope at me. "Divorce papers. You're holding me back anyway." I stared at the envelope, shock rendering me speechless. Matt turned and walked away without another word. Mom came to stand beside me, her presence grounding me. What did he want? "He's divorcing me," I whispered, the weight of the words crushing. Mom hugged me tight. "We'll get through this, Stacy, together." Returning inside, I flipped through the papers. Anger welled up. Matt had not only left me, but he had also outlined visitation rights and property divisions that favored him outrageously. No way would I let him get away with this. Days later, I learned from mutual friends in whispered conversations that Matt had moved in with a wealthy client, Celeste. The betrayal added fuel to my fire. "Mom, Dad, I'm fighting back. I'm not letting Matt walk over me," I declared one morning. "Good for you," Dad said, pride in his voice. Angie also stepped up, offering support. "You've got this, Stacy. Nathan deserves better, and so do you." Preparations began in earnest. My lawyer gathered evidence of Matt's neglect and financial recklessness. Greg's surprising support came as an unexpected boon. He hated Matt's tactics as much as I did. One evening, Greg said, "Stacy, if you need anything, count on me. Matt's dug his own grave, and I'll help you cover him up." Nathan cooed in his crib while I fed him, my resolve strengthening. "We're going to be okay, Nathan. I'll make sure of it." Despite Matt's attempts to drag us down, I felt a growing sense of purpose. The courtroom confrontation was coming, and I knew I had to be ready. For Nathan. For our future. For justice. Courtrooms always felt cold, no matter the season. Sitting beside my lawyer, Mrs. Hayes, the tension in the air thickened. Matt sat across from us with his attorney, looking smug as ever. "Your Honor," Mrs. Hayes began, her voice strong and clear, "we present evidence of Mr. Miller's financial recklessness and neglectful behavior towards his family." My heart pounded as she laid out documents showing Matt's misuse of our savings and the loans he'd taken without my knowledge. Pictures of unfinished nursery projects and messages ignored while I was in labor flashed on the screen. Matt's attorney, Mr. Collins, tried to counter. "These are measures Mr. Miller took to ensure financial stability. His investment in the condo is for the family's benefit." Mrs. Hayes didn't miss a beat. "That so-called investment jeopardizes their future. More importantly, Mr. Miller's neglect cannot be justified." She turned towards me, offering a reassuring nod. "Stacy, could you explain how Mr. Miller's actions have impacted your life and the life of your son?" I stood, my legs slightly trembling but my voice steady. "Matt has been absent, physically and emotionally. He missed our son's birth because he was at a meeting. He took our savings and put us in debt for a condo to impress clients and gain his father's approval. And now he's living with another woman, showing zero regard for our family." Matt fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable with the spotlight on his failures. A few days later, while preparing for another round in court, a knock on my door revealed Greg. "I have something that might help," he said, handing over a folder. I opened it to find emails and text messages, proof of Matt's deceit and manipulation. "That deal with Celeste, the financial strain, it's all here," Greg said. "Use it." The next day in court, Mrs. Hayes presented Greg's evidence. "Your Honor, these documents show Mr. Miller's manipulation of his own wife and his financial recklessness." Matt's face drained of color as every dirty detail was laid bare before the judge. As court recessed, I overheard Matt arguing with Celeste on a phone call. "I did this for us. You knew what this was." He barked, but the line went dead. Celeste had hung up on him. His relationship with her crumbling was a small but satisfying vindication. Back in session, Matt was forced to admit his failings under cross-examination. His facade was crumbling, and the courtroom could see it. Finally, the judge spoke, her voice firm and decisive. Given the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Miller's actions were detrimental to the family's welfare. Full custody of Nathan Miller is awarded to Stacy Miller. Mr. Miller is required to sell the condo to settle debts and provide appropriate financial support to Stacy Miller and their son. A weight lifted off my shoulders. Relief washed over me as I hugged Mrs. Hayes, tears of gratitude streaming down my face. Matt looked utterly defeated, his once certain arrogance replaced by a grim realization of his downfall. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a new strength within me. I clutched Nathan close, knowing the fight had been worth it. "Stacy, you did it," Mom said, embracing me outside the courthouse. "We did it," I corrected, looking at my family and friends who stood by me. Greg approached with a small smile. "Told you could count on me." "Thank you, Greg," I said sincerely. As the crowd thinned, Angie squeezed my hand. "What's next, Stacy?" I looked at Nathan, then back at her. "We start fresh, build a new life, one step at a time." We walked away from the courthouse, the future suddenly filled with possibilities. For Nathan. For me. For a new beginning without Matt's shadow looming over us. It was time to rebuild, stronger and wiser, ready to face whatever came next. Sitting in the courtroom once more was nerve-wracking, but I held my head high. This was the final showdown. Matt sat across from me, eyes cold and resentful. His facade of control was slipping, and everyone could see it. The judge's gavel came down, calling the court to order. Mrs. Hayes stood up, ready for battle. "Your Honor, today we present further evidence showing Mr. Miller's ongoing neglect and financial irresponsibility." She displayed bank statements and documents highlighting the depths of Matt's financial mess. Each piece of evidence painted a damning picture of his recklessness. Matt's lawyer, Mr. Collins, tried to object. "Your Honor, these were extreme measures taken to secure a better future for the family." The judge silenced him with a raised hand. "Continue, Mrs. Hayes." She nodded and gestured toward Greg, who took the stand. "Greg Miller, could you tell the court what you know about your brother's actions?" Greg cleared his throat. "Matt was always trying to impress our father. He used Stacy and Nathan to get ahead, using family money recklessly. He even tried manipulating Celeste, but that backfired." I watched Matt squirm, trying to maintain his composure, but failing. Mrs. Hayes pressed on. "And what did you do when you discovered this?" "I gave Stacy the evidence to show how deceitful and irresponsible Matt has been," Greg answered. Matt shot Greg a venomous look. "You've always been jealous. This is all about making me look bad." Greg's face remained impassive. "No, Matt. This is about doing what's right." The judge leaned forward, her expression stern. "Mr. Naff Miller, it's evident from the testimonies and evidence that your actions have been detrimental to your family. Stacy has shown great resilience, and it's clear she prioritizes Nathan's well-being. Therefore, I will uphold my previous ruling. Full custody remains with Stacy, and you will comply with all financial obligations." I exhaled, relief washing over me. Matt looked shattered as the realization of his defeat set in. As we exited the courtroom, he approached me one last time. "Stacy, you don't have to do this. We can work something out." I shook my head firmly. "You had your chances, Matt. This is what's best for Nathan." His eyes narrowed, revealing his vile nature once more. "You'll regret this." I met his gaze head-on. "No, Matt. You're the one who'll regret losing us." Outside the courthouse, Angie met me with a tight hug. "It's finally over." "Yes, it is," I said, feeling a sense of peace for the first time in months. Mom and Dad joined us, their pride evident. "We knew you could do it," Dad said, his voice filled with emotion. Greg approached, an awkward smile on his face. "I'm just glad I could help." "You did more than that, Greg," I said, giving him a grateful hug. "Thank you." He nodded, stepping back to let me have my moment with Nathan. Holding my son close, I whispered, "We did it, little one. We're free." As the days passed, Matt's financial situation worsened. He was forced to sell the condo, and his relationship with Celeste dissolved entirely. His professional reputation crumbled, and he was left grappling with the mess he'd created. Meanwhile, I focused on the future. With the legal battles behind us, I began to rebuild our lives. I returned to work in marketing, finding joy in my career once more. Nathan thrived in the loving environment my parents, friends, and I provided. One night, as Nathan slept peacefully, I glanced around our cozy home, feeling a wave of gratitude. The journey had been rough, but we emerged stronger. Karma had served its due course, and now it was time to embrace the new horizons ahead. I promised myself and Nathan that we'd face whatever came next with courage, resilience, and hope. The storm had passed, and we were ready to bask in the sunlight of new beginnings. Balancing work and motherhood proved challenging, yet rewarding. Every morning started with Nathan's cheerful giggles, a sound that fueled my day. I'd drop him off at Mom and Dad's, knowing he was in good hands, before heading to the office. "Morning, Stacy," Angie said, greeting me with a warm smile as I walked in. "Morning. Ready for the big presentation?" I asked, feeling the familiar rush of excitement. "Absolutely. Let's knock it out of the park," she replied, sharing my enthusiasm. Work offered a much-needed sense of normalcy and purpose. I threw myself into projects determined to showcase my skills and rebuild my career. My team rallied around me, respecting the balance I struck between being a professional and a mother. Back at home, evenings were filled with laughter and warmth. Nathan took his first steps, and I celebrated every milestone with my parents. Life started feeling like a new kind of normal. One evening, while feeding Nathan, my phone buzzed. A text from Greg. "Can we meet? Need to discuss something important." Curious but cautious, I agreed. We met at a local cafe where Greg's expression was serious. "Stacy, there's something you need to know," he began, his tone grave. "Matt's been trying to undermine you at the office, spreading lies to our father, hoping to turn him against you." My heart clenched. "Why won't he just leave us alone?" "Because he can't stand losing," Greg replied. "But listen, I've got an idea. There's still money involved from Dad's business, and I want to make sure Matt doesn't get his hands on it." I nodded, desperate to protect Nathan's future. "What do you need from me?" "Just your support. Together, we can redirect Dad's investments to benefit Nathan. It's what he would have wanted," Greg explained. It was risky, but I trusted Greg. "All right, let's do this." Over the next few weeks, Greg and I worked tirelessly to secure the investments. We presented our case to his father, backed by evidence of Matt's manipulations. The old man listened, eventually agreeing to our plan. Matt's downfall continued. His schemes backfired, and he was left to grapple with the repercussions. Meanwhile, Greg and I ensured that Nathan's future was secure. One day, while playing with Nathan at the park, I felt a deep sense of peace. Angie joined us, watching Nathan toddle around with a grin on her face. "How's it feel to finally have everything sorted?" she asked. "Honestly, it's freeing," I responded, watching my son's joyful expression. "I didn't think we'd get here." Angie patted my shoulder. "You're stronger than you ever knew." As the days passed, Matt's presence in our lives faded. He struggled to find stability, his once promising career in shambles. Karma had come full circle, and he was forced to face the consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, I thrived. My career flourished, and Nathan grew up in a loving, supportive environment. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving, building a future full of hope and promise. In a final gesture of gratitude, I decided to help Greg. His loyalty and support had been invaluable. Redirecting some of the investments to aid his startup, I ensured that Matt's former schemes benefited someone who truly deserved it. One evening, as the sun set, I sat on the porch with Nathan in my lap, feeling a deep sense of contentment. I had fought hard, and it had paid off. The future looked bright, and I was ready for whatever came next. Looking at the horizon, I whispered, "We've come a long way, little one. This is just the beginning." Nathan giggled, and I smiled, filled with hope and confidence. We were ready to embrace our new horizons together, stronger than ever.
She was like a younger, ostentatious female boss to me. She was caught in a sudden shower, and I saw her real face. She looks up at me and asks provocatively, "Do you want to see more?" I find myself holding my breath. "Do you want to come to my place?" When she blurted these words out, her response was, "I'm Michael Collins, and this year I turned 28. Please be patient with me while I briefly discuss my upbringing and life's journey." "I have it all from birth." "Oh, that one," would be the admiring response from everyone if I mentioned the name of the company I've worked for. I was born the son of the company's president. My parents adored me without showing any preference, despite the fact that I was the second son. By the time I completed primary school, it had already been settled that my older brother would inherit my father's company. I had to choose my own route then. My parents shared a strong commitment to education. Fortunately, I did better in my studies than the majority of my classmates, so I didn't detest it. About the time I was in high school, I came to the realization that I was inherently smart, perhaps just like my father. A gift I never took for granted despite being born with. I worked hard to live up to my parents' expectations. A part of me thought I was just a little bit superior to my brother. Despite his kindness, I saw him as just another male. His benevolence was the only thing that set him apart. That's a big deal, my mother observed, but I wasn't happy with my brother, the one who carried all the burdens of our parents and grandparents and was expected to take over the business despite my superior ability. I must have been a prickly, conceited man back then. Now that I think about it, it was awkward. I consider it a youthful mistake. I sincerely hoped that one day my parents would see my brilliance and replace their hair. But that day never materialized. After graduating from university, I wasn't too excited about job seeking because I had such bad intentions. Nevertheless, over 10 companies, including my top pick, sent me job offers. I was set to make my first move as a working adult, even though I was still not happy about the inheritance issue. That's when I had my first failure in life. My initial choice of employer was a well-known advertising agency. There were a lot of wealthy kids like myself when I joined. I, the person who was always the center of attention, was swiftly forgotten. The strange feeling of not being the center of attention unsettled me. I started to feel more and more nervous that I would not be able to control the scenario the way I had imagined. My natural haughtiness got in the way, and I disregarded the advice of my colleagues, making a grave error. Less than half a year passed before I made a fatal error. I can handle everything on my own, I reasoned. It was an error brought about by my conceited notion. I just stared blankly as my boss apologizing to clients and my coworkers frantically covering for me. That was when I was shattered. The following day, I turned in my resignation. I never returned to work. I no longer wanted to socialize or meet new people who were aware of my existence. My anxious parents made arrangements for me to live in an apartment separately from our family house. I was evicted from my home and sought safety in an apartment that was made available to me. I started going outside after half a year, but I wasn't in the mood to look for a work. I had no job. I made it a daily goal to live a lazy life. I made the decision to live a life that totally rejected the person I used to be. I lived like this for a couple of years. I'd attribute my ability to reintegrate into society to a string of fortuitous little incidents. Movies were my only source of enjoyment throughout this period. My apartment was close to an art house movie theater. They screened foreign films, including some relatively obscure ones. At the conclusion of the year, they also screened all-night films in this little theater. It was a fine art house theater with strong ties to the neighborhood. One day, while purchasing a ticket as normal, I noticed an employment poster at the front desk. "Are you hiring staff?" As soon as I had my ticket, I inquired. I was informed that they had an unexpected vacancy and were hiring immediately. I was unaware of the kind of work that art house cinemas did at the time. When they said, "If you like movies, it's a fun job," I became interested right away. Applying for the job was my decision. My resume was brought the following day. I spoke with the manager of the theater right away, and I was hired right away. I remember being a little afraid, but everything went so well. In case it turned out to be a really severe firm, I was concerned about what to do. The day after the interview was when I was supposed to start work when I got back to my apartment. I was apprehensive about the nature of the work. It appeared like my job was just sales and publicity on the first day. Creating leaflets and posters, as well as displays within the theater and outdoors, were all part of the publicity activity. Sales comprised buying and promoting the movies that were going to be exhibited. Each member of the small crew was responsible for several responsibilities. "Hello, this is Michael Collins." I lowered my head and said "nice to meet you" to my supervisor, a girl who had a doll-like appearance. She actually did look like a small girl, yet I suppose I should label her a woman still. Her age, she was 5 years younger than me, surprised me once more. The manager of the movie theater confided in me that she was a part-time employee and had dropped out of high school. She appeared to have started working here after being asked whether she would like to work full-time after working many part-time jobs. After then, her efforts were reported to be enormous. They added that all the movies she bought were hits and that she had good taste at first. She is now a well-known great buyer in the business. My training was under her and the cinema manager's supervision. I obtained a younger boss in this way. With a younger girl as my employer, a week flew by. During that time, I soon learned about her powers. My acquired talents from my time as a student were useless. Every day, I would mentally torture myself over my incapacity. The manager of the movie theater advised, "Take your time to learn." However, I was proud to be an older guy and a man. My zeal ultimately turned into a wheel that invited failure. Her nickname for me was Junker each time it occurred. Junker quickly became my alias. I understood she was referring to me in a loving manner, so it wasn't sarcasm. However, being referred to as a Junker was also an embarrassment to me because I had been succeeding handily. "One day, I'll exact my revenge," I said to myself. This sensation would encourage my next error. Claire, my supervisor, is a doll-like beauty. Her white complexion and petite stature give her a delicate overall appearance. But over the past week, I've come to understand her strong inner nature all too well. In general, everyone at this place of employment is very eccentric. Frequently, the discussions held here border on sarcasm. I honestly believed at first that I had chosen the wrong job. But after I'd watched everyone for a bit, I became aware of how foolish my assumptions had been. Everyone is genuinely dedicated to their profession, and what may sting like hurtful jokes isn't meant to be taken that way. Arguments may arise as a result, but they will only last so long. No one participates in conversations that flatly contradict the views of others. They listened to my views even as a novice and offered suggestions with a hint of humor. In an environment where there's no need to put on a front of being well-versed in everything, employees seem to grow at a different rate. "Michael, had you finished ordering the flyers?" Claire gave me directions the moment she got back from the client meeting. "Everything is well. The submission has been completed." Claire responded, "Not bad, for a Junker," and set a gift on my desk, a convenience store cafe latte. She must have recalled that I only ever drink this while we're on a call outside. There were voices of discontent from the other desks. "Why don't we get anything?" "Stop acting like a baby. Proceed to purchase it on your own." Claire is tenacious even when everyone else is older. She is practically the most powerful person here because she is just as severe with the theater manager. The theater manager laughs it off, adding, "That's just how it is with newbies, even though I feel a little privileged. I can't let people younger than me spoil me all the time." I made a promise to myself as I sipped my cafe coffee. One aspect of my work is sales. Claire was with me when I had an outside sales job one day. I was a little anxious because this was my first time going out with Claire, even though I had gone out a few times with the theater manager. We went to a few ticket offices and bookstores so that I could get used to traveling alone in the future. The weather was pleasant, and it had been sunny since the morning, but after we had visited approximately 5 locations, the sky began to go darker. "It could pour." She inquired, "Do you have an umbrella?" "I don't usually carry one." Claire threw a worried glance up at the cloudy sky. It dawned on me that I had never seen her hold an umbrella. Just as I was going to inquire as to why she hadn't, a torrential downpour struck, an unexpected deluge. We were unable to take action in the matter. We were caught in the midst of a crosswalk and had to run. We were saturated even though we were able to hide from the rain under a store awning. We were drenched from head to toe in a matter of seconds. Claire made a frustrated clicking sound with her tongue. She removed her damp hair with a napkin, wearing an annoyed expression. The rain appeared to have somewhat smudged her makeup. She kicked my leg angrily and exclaimed, "This sucks." "I'm not the one who made it rain, you know," I said. There was unease in my gaze as I glanced down at Claire. Her face had a distinct quality to it. I believe her makeup was smeared, but something wasn't quite right. Upon thorough observation, I discovered the source of the discomfort. "Ugh, Claire, did you have beauty marks under your eye?" Usually, she needs to cover them up with concealer or foundation. Her left eye had 3 lines of beauty marks. I got a slight thrill, like though I had just uncovered a secret about Miller. "Want to see more?" As she glanced up at me and spoke, my heart skipped a beat. It was quite seductive. These suddenly visible beauty marks had me completely enamored. I know full well that I always had a fascination for beauty marks. I involuntarily leaned in closer to Claire and gave her a downward glance. "Would you like to visit my home? This is not far from it." Claire's face flushed crimson red at what I said. I also began to experience some embarrassment. I'd attempted to defuse the situation, but before I could speak, I was quickly kicked in the shin. "Sorry." "Hey, why did you do that?" "Cease talking. What a younker you are." Claire spat out these furious words, stopped talking nonsense, and hurried off, leaving me crouched in misery. She would be drenched when she arrived home because the rain hadn't stopped. I'm hoping she avoids getting a cold. I became concerned. Claire had evidently gone straight home and wasn't back at the office the next morning when I returned to the movie theater. Claire had a somewhat icy attitude. She was consciously staying away from me. Her welcomes were a little forced, and she refused to look at me. She delegated duties to other seniors even when I attempted to talk about it. I was being methodically barred from her domain. I was being questioned by other staff members. "Hey, what did you do to her?" Things became awkward as a result. I managed to catch up with Claire during the lunch break, but she refused to acknowledge me. I approached Claire in a corridor nook, hidden from other employees' view. "Why are you avoiding me?" "I'm not trying to avoid you." She stared up at me. "You're just imagining things, younker," and I couldn't help but think back to what had transpired the day before. The 3 hidden beauty marks resurfaced when I gave Claire's left eye a gentle thumb massage. Unaffected by my touch, she gave me a sneer in return. My recollection began to reel backwards. These beauty marks were not new to me. This occurred during my time as a college student. I was conceited and unlikable then. I believed I was infallible and couldn't fathom failing. My social club and my studies felt like fun, and I wasted a lot of time there. Our club frequently went to this bar, which was decorated in the Italian style and was quite posh, ideal for courting women. We were using a mixer that day. 4 girls and 3 friends. I believe the majority of the girls showed interest in me. When my friend saw it, he became irritated. I believe he would be better off improving himself if he was going to become irritated, but he didn't seem to be that kind of person. To make matters worse, he began flirting with the young waiter who carried our lunch. The girl, who appeared to be in her high school years, was obviously uncomfortable and blushing. She had multiple piercings and pixie-cut hair that had been dyed silver. Because of the way she looked, I assumed that she could be a little rebellious. I thought she could resist the flirting, but I quickly learned that looks can be deceiving. She was unable to correct the customer too severely because she was truly upset. It didn't seem like she had the experience needed to handle things well. Seeing this, I gave the doll-like beauty sitting next to me a little signal with my eyes to hold on for a while. I had been trying to win her over. "Hey, that's enough. You see she's upset, don't you?" My companion was leaning toward the waitress when I reached out and grabbed him by the collar. I was able to instruct the waitress to go ahead and leave while he was thrashing around. "You've gone too far, dude." I laughed and diffused the tension by giving my pal a shoulder pat. I saw the waitress bowing to me repeatedly from behind the counter. 3 little moles were visible beneath her eyes. Yes, it is correct. I remember now. Wait, the waitress from that Italian bar. Claire snapped her tongue sharply at my cry. Before I graduated, I had gone to that bar a lot. I must have seen that expression innumerable times. "Aren't you going to marry that doll-like girl?" Claire asked without warning. She must be referring to my college girlfriend, who had a striking resemblance to Claire. As I gave it some thinking, I had the epiphany. It's unbelievable. Claire, I may be misinterpreting, but is that costume a cosplay? I moaned as soon as I felt a stinging pain in my chin. Claire had given me a headbutt that had struck my chin. The pain made me crouch on the spot, and Claire stood triumphantly above me. "Select your words wisely, young lady," she brashly exclaimed, glancing down at me and clicking her tongue as she turned to leave. It sounded to me like someone said, "Thanks for back then." "Cinema manager, I have something to ask you," I yelled as I stormed into the movie theater manager's office. The manager of the movie theater smiled and remarked, "Oh, you know now." He told me that the reason he hired me was because Claire asked him to. It seems that she begged him to hire me since, although I had assisted her in the past as her first love, I was now unemployed and having difficulties. It seems like they coordinated the employment advertisements with my ticket purchase. Every employee at this art house cinema has performed a role in me. Claire tried to dress like the girl I was dating at the time since she recalled me. She clarified that while it wasn't quite cosplay, it was close. The manager of the movie theater chuckled as he informed me that Claire had promised them all to keep her appearance alteration and everything else a secret. Claire had done all the organizing. How twisted, and yet, I felt, how charming she was. Claire had returned to the girl I knew the day after. Her black hair appears to have been a wig. If she'd shown up looking like this for our reunion, slim black leggings, a white t-shirt, and a very short haircut with plenty of piercings, I would have known it was Claire. Claire pretended as if nothing had happened, totally back to her previous self. While she was eating a croissant at her desk over lunch, I questioned her softly. "So, I heard I was your first love. Have you ever found me attractive?" Claire clicked her tongue and shot me a cold look. She then averted her gaze and declared, "I hate you now." Her less than sweet remark took me by surprise, and I found myself saying, "What?" Then Claire turned to face me, a naughty smirk on her face. "You're a real younker, you know." Her lips turned a little crimson. "Well, I suppose I had better stop being a younker before then. After I do, will you kindly reconsider?" I was petting Claire's head when I felt a headbutt strike my side. I stayed stooped, groaning, and contorted in agony. As she left the office, she added, "You're so cheeky for a younker," before turning around. "I guess I can wait, though." She added some words in a tiny voice, but I didn't miss them. It seemed so far off that day she would be standing next to me in a wedding gown. So, what were your thoughts? Having a channel subscription inspires me to produce more stuff. I'll see you in the upcoming video.
"You've always been so unambitious, Scarlett," my dad said, his voice cutting through the chatter at the dinner table. "Not everyone is cut out for the big leagues, and that's fine. But leave the real work to people like your brother." I set my fork down carefully, my hands trembling under the table. "And yet somehow, except for you, Dad, my unambitious self is the only other person at this table with a track record of success," I said evenly, meeting his eyes. My brother smirked, the same infuriating, dismissive grin I'd seen my entire life. My name is Scarlett Greer. I'm 32 now, but when all of this began, I was just the overlooked middle child in a family where success was measured by flash and status. My dad, Richard Greer, built one of the most successful real estate empires in Chicago. My older brother, Benjamin, was his golden boy, the heir apparent to the business despite his carelessness. My younger sister, Olivia, was the family darling, more interested in brunch and brand deals than anything resembling responsibility. And then there was me, quiet, dependable, and, according to my family, forgettable. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of chatter I wasn't part of. Benjamin boasted about some new property deal he'd supposedly closed, though I'd overheard whispers at the last company event that it was riddled with issues. My dad beamed at him, asking pointed questions to keep the spotlight on his son. Olivia chimed in here and there, sprinkling in anecdotes about her latest social escapades. Meanwhile, I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate, wondering why I still subjected myself to these dinners. When I was younger, I used to try to keep up, to impress them. I graduated near the top of my class and took on every internship I could find, thinking if I worked hard enough, they'd finally see me. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. "You're too quiet," my dad would say. "You don't have the killer instinct for this business." It didn't matter that I outperformed my peers, or that I had ideas to bring the company forward. They'd already made up their minds about me. The tipping point came a few years ago, not that my family noticed. I'd been sitting in one of the company's weekly strategy meetings, a formality where my dad and Benjamin made all the decisions while the rest of us watched. That day, I had a proposal, a detailed plan to turn a struggling property into a profitable residential complex. I'd spent weeks researching, running the numbers, and crafting a pitch I thought even my dad couldn't ignore. When it was finally my turn to speak, I barely got 2 sentences in before Benjamin interrupted. "That location's a lost cause," he said dismissively. "We've already sunk too much into it. Let's move on." "I've actually found a way," I started, but my dad cut me off with a wave of his hand. "If Benjamin says it's not worth it, then it's not worth it. Next item." I remember sitting there, my face burning, my carefully crafted plan forgotten as they moved on like I wasn't even in the room. That night, I made a decision. If they didn't want to listen to me in their company, I'd build my own. I didn't quit the family company outright. That would have drawn too much attention. Instead, I started small, working on my own projects quietly in the background. A rundown duplex on the outskirts of town became my first investment. It was all I could afford with the little I'd saved, but I saw the potential no one else did. I spent weekends painting walls, replacing fixtures, and learning the ins and outs of property management. When I sold it a year later, the profit was modest, but it was mine, and that was just the beginning. Over the next few years, I scouted undervalued properties across Chicago, partnering with Sophia Tran, a savvy real estate investor I'd met through a mutual friend. Sophia was everything I needed in a business partner: smart, experienced, and just as determined to prove people wrong. Together, we built something remarkable, one property at a time. By the time I was 30, my portfolio was thriving. What started as a side hustle had grown into a legitimate business, with properties spanning residential complexes, boutique office spaces, and even a few prime retail locations. Sophia and I ran everything under a company name no one in my family would recognize, Tran and Partners. I wasn't just building wealth, I was building a reputation. Quietly, steadily, I had become one of my father's fiercest competitors. The irony? My family had no idea. While they were busy managing their sprawling, mismanaged empire, I was buying up properties they'd written off as unprofitable and turning them into successes. Each deal felt like a private victory, a small step toward proving to myself that I was more than the shadow they'd cast me in. One evening, as I sat poring over financial reports, Sophia walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. "You've been at it all day," she said, placing 1 cup in front of me. "Take a break, Scarlett. Even machines need to recharge." I smiled, taking a sip. I can't help it. Every time I see how well the numbers are trending, I think about the next move. There's this office building near the Loop I've been eyeing. Sophia raised an eyebrow as she settled into the chair across from me. Let me guess. It's undervalued, ignored by every major player, but you've already figured out how to turn it into a gold mine? Pretty much, I admitted with a grin. It's exactly the kind of property my dad and Benjamin would laugh off, which makes it perfect. Sophia leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. Speaking of them, don't you think it's only a matter of time before they figure out who's behind Tran and Partners? Maybe, I said, shrugging. But by the time they do, it won't matter. We're not just surviving, we're thriving. And besides, I hesitated, swirling the coffee in my cup. Part of me doesn't even care if they find out anymore. They've already dismissed me my whole life. I've learned to live without their approval. Sophia tilted her head, studying me. You're not doing this for their approval, Scarlett. You're doing it for you. And if they ever do figure it out, well, let's just say I wouldn't mind being a fly on the wall when that happens. I chuckled, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. You're right, I said. I'm doing this for me. And whether they find out or not, it doesn't change the fact that we've built something incredible. Sophia raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. To building something incredible. I clinked my cup against hers, a renewed sense of determination burning in my chest. To building something incredible. At every family gathering, my dad and Benjamin never missed an opportunity to remind me of my so-called uselessness. Scarlett, when's the last time you even stepped foot in the office? My dad would sneer, shaking his head as if my very presence was an insult. You know, for someone with shares in the company, you sure do a great job of making yourself invisible. Benjamin, always eager to pile on, would chuckle and add, Not that anyone notices, of course. It's not like the company's missing out on your valuable contributions. They thought they were clever, mocking me for stepping back, unaware of the real reason I'd distanced myself. I had stopped going to the office regularly the moment I started working with Sophia. At first, it was because I needed the time to focus on our projects. Later, it became a matter of self-preservation. Every visit was a reminder that, in their eyes, I was an afterthought, someone who didn't matter enough to be included or even taken seriously. I showed up only when absolutely necessary, attending shareholder meetings out of obligation and slipping out as soon as I could. To them, my absence was just more proof of my irrelevance. To me, it was a chance to build something far greater than they could ever imagine. From the beginning, Sophia had been the face of Tran and Partners. It was a strategic decision we made together. She was the one who handled the public engagements, the media interviews, and the high-profile negotiations. I preferred to stay behind the scenes, focusing on the strategy, analytics, and decision-making that drove our success. It wasn't that I was hiding. I just knew my strengths, and Sophia's confidence and charisma were unmatched when it came to dealing with people. It worked perfectly. To the outside world, Tran and Partners was Sophia's brainchild, a fast-growing real estate firm led by a savvy, ambitious woman with a sharp eye for undervalued properties. Investors admired her, competitors envied her, and the press couldn't get enough of her story. No one knew about the woman behind the curtain, the strategist pulling the strings and quietly steering the company's direction. Only a handful of trusted partners were aware that I was the architect behind the scenes, designing every move with meticulous precision. This anonymity was by design. It gave me the freedom to operate without scrutiny, especially from my family. My name wasn't on the website, my photo wasn't in the annual reports, and no one in the industry connected me to Tran and Partners. Even if someone had looked into our operations, they wouldn't have found my fingerprints on anything. To everyone outside of our tight circle, Scarlett Greer was nothing more than a shareholder in her family's real estate empire, a name on paper with no active role in either company. And that's exactly how I wanted it. Not even my father or Benjamin suspected that Tran and Partners had anything to do with me. To them, it was just another small competitor, nipping at the edges of the market. They'd never think to look closer. Never imagined that the company slowly outpacing them in certain areas was led by someone they'd dismissed as irrelevant. The irony wasn't just satisfying, it was my greatest weapon. But I knew this balance couldn't last forever. The bigger we grew, the more attention we'd attract. And one day, whether I was ready for it or not, my two worlds would collide. The industry gala was the kind of event my dad and Benjamin thrived on. It was all about networking, rubbing shoulders with the who's who of real estate, and reminding everyone why Greer Enterprises was considered a powerhouse. I wasn't planning on going, it wasn't really my scene, but Sophia insisted. "Come on, Scarlett," she said as she tossed an elegant black dress onto my couch. "You've earned a night to celebrate. Besides, it'll be fun to watch everyone squirm when they realize how far Tran and Partners has come." I reluctantly agreed, knowing my presence would likely go unnoticed. My dad and Benjamin were sure to be there, but they'd written me off so thoroughly that I'd be just another face in the crowd. And I was fine with that. At least that's what I told myself. The ballroom was breathtaking, the kind of opulence that screamed old money. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne, and the city's most powerful figures gathered in clusters, exchanging polite laughter and business cards. As soon as I spotted my dad and Benjamin, I knew the night was about to become an exercise in patience. "Well, well," Benjamin said, smirking as I approached their table. "Look who decided to show up. You know, Scarlett, these events are usually for people who actually contribute to the industry." "Be nice," my dad muttered, though his tone wasn't much kinder. He barely glanced at me as he adjusted his tie. "Just try not to embarrass us." I swallowed the retort bubbling in my throat and found a seat at a table near the back, where Sophia and a few of our closest colleagues were waiting. My dad and brother couldn't see me from there. "How's it going over there?" Sophia whispered, nodding toward my family. "Exactly as expected," I replied. "Let's just get through tonight." As the evening progressed, award after award was handed out, and Greer Enterprises didn't take home a single one. My dad's expression grew darker with every passing announcement, and Benjamin's usual bravado dimmed. I could see the frustration building between them, but I stayed out of it, content to watch from the sidelines. Then it happened. "And the final award of the night," the host announced, "goes to the firm that has shown unparalleled innovation and excellence in the real estate sector. This year's winner is Tran and Partners." My heart skipped a beat as applause erupted around the room. Sophia rose from her seat, beaming as she made her way to the stage. My dad and Benjamin exchanged confused glances, clearly wondering how a smaller firm like Tran and Partners had managed to overshadow them. Sophia accepted the award gracefully, her poise and charisma commanding the room as she took the microphone. "Thank you," she began, her voice warm and steady. "This recognition means so much to Tran and Partners and to everyone who has contributed to our journey. When we started this company, we had a vision: to find value where others saw none, to innovate where others played it safe, and to build not just properties, but opportunities. And tonight, being here among so many talented people, this award feels like validation of that vision." Applause rippled through the crowd, polite and appreciative, but Sophia wasn't finished. She adjusted the microphone and took a small step forward, her expression softening into something more personal. "But," she continued, her voice taking on a deeper resonance, "this moment isn't just about me or even our team as a whole. It's about someone who has worked tirelessly behind the scenes, someone whose brilliance and determination have been the driving force behind Tran and Partners. I'm standing here tonight because of her vision, her strategic mind, and her unwavering commitment to excellence." I froze in my seat, my stomach tightening. Sophia's eyes swept across the room before landing on me, a small, knowing smile on her lips. Many of you may not know her name, but that's because she prefers it that way. She's not one for the spotlight, but without her, Tran and Partners wouldn't be the company it is today. The brain behind every deal we've closed, every risk we've taken, and every success we've earned is my partner and closest confidant, Scarlett Greer. The room fell into stunned silence, and then the murmurs began. Heads turned in my direction, whispers growing louder as recognition spread like wildfire. My dad and Benjamin sat frozen at their table, their expressions a mix of confusion, disbelief, and something I couldn't quite place. Humiliation, perhaps. My dad's jaw tightened, while Benjamin's smirk was wiped clean off his face. Sophia wasn't done. Scarlett's the kind of leader who doesn't need to shout to be heard, she continued. She lets her work speak for itself. She's the one who sees possibilities where others see failure, who takes risks others are too afraid to take, and who fights for what she believes in, no matter how many doubters she faces. Her brilliance has not only transformed this company, but has set a new standard for what real estate innovation looks like, and I think it's time the world knows it. Her words hit me like a wave, each one breaking down the walls I'd built to protect myself from the doubt and dismissal I'd endured for years. The murmurs in the room grew louder, but so did the applause. My colleagues at the Tran & Partners table were on their feet, clapping and cheering. Sophia turned toward me, her hand outstretched. Scarlett, come join me. This moment is yours as much as it is mine. For a moment I couldn't move. My heart pounded in my chest, and my legs felt like they were made of lead. Then I saw Sophia's encouraging smile, the warmth in her eyes, and the applause of the room began to register. Slowly, I stood, my knees shaky, but my resolve strengthening with every step I took toward the stage. As I climbed the stairs and stepped into the spotlight, I could feel every pair of eyes on me. My father's, my brother's, and the room full of industry leaders who had no idea I'd been shaping this industry from the shadows. I reached Sophia's side, and she handed me the award, her hand resting on my shoulder as she leaned into the microphone one last time. This is Scarlett Greer, Sophia said, her voice filled with pride. And if you haven't heard of her yet, trust me, you will. Standing there on stage with the weight of the award in my hands and the applause thundering around me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. A sense of validation, not from the crowd, but from myself. My eyes scanned the room briefly, landing on my father and Benjamin. Their stunned expressions were priceless, a mix of shock, disbelief, and a flicker of something that might have been respect. Sophia leaned toward me, her voice low and steady. Say something, she whispered, her hand giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. I stepped up to the microphone, my heart pounding. I wasn't one for speeches, but this wasn't about grandeur. It was about being seen. I took a deep breath and spoke. Thank you, I began, my voice clear despite the lump in my throat. This is unexpected but deeply meaningful. When Sophia and I started Tran & Partners, we knew we were taking a chance, on properties others dismissed, on ideas others ignored, and on ourselves. Tonight is proof that those risks were worth it. The crowd clapped politely, but I wasn't done. To everyone who believed in us, thank you. And to those who didn't, well, I allowed myself a small, sly smile. Thank you for underestimating us. It gave us the fuel to succeed. The laughter and applause that followed buoyed me, but my focus was elsewhere, on my father's expression, which had shifted from stunned to something unreadable, and Benjamin, whose jaw was clenched so tightly I thought he might crack a tooth. I stepped back from the microphone, Sophia beaming beside me. As the applause finally died down and we exited the stage, she turned to me. Now that, she said with a grin, was a moment worth savoring. As we returned to our table, I could feel the ripple of whispers following us, the weight of the room's attention still lingering. Sophia leaned over, her voice low but amused. I'd pay good money to know what's going through your dad's head right now. I glanced toward their table. My father sat stiffly, his hands clasped on the table in front of him, staring straight ahead. Benjamin looked like he was ready to explode, his face flushed as he whispered something heated to my dad. Olivia, ever the oblivious one, sipped her wine, her eyes darting between the two of them as if trying to gauge whether the tension was worth interrupting her evening. They'll come around, Sophia said as if reading my thoughts. Maybe not tonight, maybe not ever in the way you deserve, but they'll have no choice but to recognize what you've built. Maybe, I replied, though I wasn't sure I cared anymore. For once, their acknowledgement wasn't the goal. It was the byproduct of proving to myself that I could thrive without their approval. As the event wound down, I couldn't avoid them any longer. My dad approached our table, Benjamin trailing a few steps behind. Sophia, ever poised, stood as he arrived, extending her hand with a gracious smile. "Mr. Greer," she said warmly, "it's an honor to meet you." He shook her hand stiffly, his usual confidence absent. "Likewise," he replied, his voice strained. His eyes flicked to me, a mixture of pride and discomfort flickering in his expression. "Scarlett, we need to talk." Benjamin snorted, crossing his arms. "Talk? What's there to talk about? You've clearly been busy undermining the family business behind our backs." Sophia's smile didn't waver, but her tone hardened just enough to send a chill through the air. "Undermining? I'd say Scarlett's been doing what you should have been doing, innovating and succeeding. But I suppose we can leave that discussion for another time." Benjamin's face turned a deeper shade of red, but my dad held up a hand to silence him. "Enough," he said sharply. He turned back to me. "Scarlett, can we step outside for a moment, just the two of us?" I followed my dad out onto the terrace, the cool night air a welcome relief from the intensity of the ballroom. The city lights stretched out before us, glittering against the dark sky. He stood silently for a moment, his hands resting on the railing, his shoulders unusually tense. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't know," he said quietly, his voice heavy with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe. "I had no idea you were capable of all this." I crossed my arms, leaning against the railing beside him. "That's because you never cared to find out," I replied, my tone even but firm. "You and Benjamin were so busy dismissing me that you didn't bother to see what I was doing. You wrote me off without a second thought." He sighed, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me from what?" I asked, unable to hide the frustration in my voice. "From proving you wrong? From showing you that I could do more than you ever gave me credit for?" He turned to face me, his expression earnest for the first time in years. "From failing," he admitted. "This business, it's brutal, Scarlett. I didn't think you had the..." "The what?" I interrupted. "The guts? The brains? The drive? What exactly did you think I lacked?" His silence was telling, and for a moment I felt the sting of old wounds reopening. But then he shook his head. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I see that now. Tonight made it impossible to deny." A couple of days later, my dad requested a meeting at my office. He showed up precisely on time, wearing his usual sharp suit and carrying a briefcase that somehow made him look even more imposing. Sophia was already waiting in the conference room when he arrived, poised and unflappable as always. I joined them, feeling a mix of curiosity and inevitability about whatever he was about to propose. He wasted no time getting to the point. "Scarlett, Sophia," he began, opening his briefcase and sliding a folder across the table. "I've spoken with the board, and we're prepared to make an offer to acquire Tran and Partners. We believe your expertise and vision would be an invaluable addition to Greer Enterprises." Sophia raised an eyebrow, her expression cool as she glanced at me before responding. "That's a generous offer, Mr. Greer," she said diplomatically. "But I think Scarlett should have the first word on this." My dad looked at me expectantly, his confidence barely masking the uncertainty beneath it. I didn't even need to open the folder to know my answer. I leaned back in my chair, meeting his gaze directly. "No," I said simply. His brows furrowed, clearly not expecting such an immediate and decisive response. "Scarlett, at least consider—" "No," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "I've worked too hard to build something that's mine. I'm not going to give that up to go back to a company where I spent years being overlooked and dismissed. I'm free now, Dad. and I'm staying that way. The silence that followed was heavy, but I didn't regret my words. Sophia smiled faintly, a silent show of support, while my dad sat back, looking as though he didn't quite know what to do with himself. For once, he couldn't argue. He couldn't deny my success, and he couldn't buy my respect. Finally, he nodded, closing the folder and standing up. "I underestimated you, Scarlett," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I won't make that mistake again." As he left the room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't need his validation anymore. I had built my own path, my own success, and I was finally free to walk it without looking back. Hey there! Did you like the story? If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot and makes sure you won't miss out on more great stories we share here. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.